Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Empowered Self podcast. I'm your host, Krista Long, and wherever this conversation finds you today, I invite you to take a small pause and gently arrive into this moment. Today's episode explores healing, self-trust, neurodivergence, and what it means to come back to yourself after life experiences that can shape us deeply. I am delighted to welcome Jen Jackson to the podcast today. Jen is a licensed therapist, author, and founder of Counsel Me, based in Charleston, South Carolina. She specializes in trauma-informed care, supporting individuals as they navigate high-conflict relationships, neurodivergence, and the journey back to self-trust. As an autistic and highly sensitive therapist, Jen brings a deeply attuned, compassionate, and insightful approach to her work. She is also the author of Softly Wired, Reflections of an Autistic Therapist, available on Amazon. Jen, you're very welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Crystal. I've loved your podcast, so I'm excited to be here with you.
And I'm very excited to have you and to have this conversation as well with you. So, Jen, before we explore some of the themes mentioned, I'd love to begin by inviting you to share a little about your own journey and what first led you into the wonderful work that you do.
Okay, so I guess for me, and for I think many of us that do work with people, the work is deeply personal. And when I was younger, I lost my uncle to suicide. And he was someone that I felt really connected to. He's a very sensitive and kind person. And that loss stayed with me throughout my life. And I didn't have language for it at the time, but it created this deep desire to understand pain and make sure people didn't feel as alone as he might have. Sorry, I'm saying But over time, that became part of what led me into this work. But combined with my own lived experiences and my sensitivity and my journey of understanding myself, especially as an autistic therapist. So really, my work comes from both personal loss and personal understanding. So it's not something that I chose lightly, but it's something that's definitely grown with me.
And Jen, that is such a meaningful starting point. And I think often the work people are drawn to comes from something deeply understood, or in your case, a lived experience. You speak so thoughtfully as well about reclaiming self-trust after relational trauma. So my question is, why is self-trust one of the hardest things to rebuild after someone has experienced a difficult or high conflict relationship?
This is such a good question because I think it's so hard when you've been through high conflict relationship, how to trust yourself again. And it's not about necessarily building something new, but reconnecting to something that I think's always been there. That trust of self. And in high conflict or unhealthy relationships, I think we learn to override that inner voice. So we start second guessing our perceptions, our feelings, even our reality when we're in that relationship. And so healing looks less like figuring things out, but more like slowing down enough to ask, what am I actually feeling? What is my body telling me? And self-trust comes back in really small moments, like honoring my no, listening to my fatigue, believing myself when something feels off. So it's definitely not loud or dramatic. It's quiet and it builds over time.
And I think many people listening may recognize how difficult that can feel, especially when someone has spent a long time questioning themselves. Something you also speak about is why healing can still feel difficult even when life looks better, probably externally. Why calm, safety, or healthier circumstances sometimes feel uncomfortable or unfamiliar to the nervous system.
I would say one of the most important things I've learned is that the nervous system is wired for familiarity, not necessarily safety. And I see this with a lot of clients. They are so comfortable, as bad as it may have been, with the familiarity. So if someone is used to chaos or inconsistency or emotional unpredictability, that actually becomes what feels normal. When safe love shows up, something steady, calm, and consistent, it can feel unfamiliar, even unsettling at first. There's no adrenaline, there's no guessing, no emotional highs and lows. And the body can interpret that as something's missing. But over time, with consistency, the nervous system starts to recognize this is what safety actually feels like. And then I think that's where the real healing begins.
And that's a very good point as well. So I'm just wondering, why can safe love, as you say, healthy relationships or positive change sometimes initially feel threatening rather than comforting?
You ask why?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that just goes back to the familiarity and what feels kind of normal. Because you've learned over the years of being in that kind of environment how to survive in it. So that's what becomes normal and familiar. So when you then transition out of that and you experience something even possibly for the first time in a safe, healthy love, you don't know how to exist in that kind of world. It feels so unfamiliar. So it does take time. It just goes back to allowing yourself to take your time and to ease into that accepting of that kind of love. And yeah, it's not easy, but it definitely is worth the climb.
And that is such a powerful point, even this self-acceptance, because I think many people experience that without fully understanding why. And another part of your own story is receiving a diagnosis of being neurodivergent. And would you share, or could you share what that diagnosis meant for you personally and whether certain parts of your life suddenly made more sense through that lens?
Yes, I actually received my diagnosis when I was in my high conflict relationship. And so it wasn't a part of me or it wasn't something in me that was accepted or treated well. So I didn't accept that of myself either until I actually got out of that relationship and entered into this more healthy, safe love that I've embraced my autism and realized that this is who I am. And it really is like finding a map to a city you've always lived in because, like you said, it's just like the lights come on and you're like, this makes so much sense. And neurodivergence and sensitivity doesn't make someone bad at relationships, which is what I believed for a long time, even though I didn't know what to call it. I thought whatever is going on with me just makes me bad at relationships. But it certainly changes how relationships are experienced. For example, I process everything deeply. So someone's tone or their energy or subtle shifts. I just don't, I don't just hear what someone says, but I feel what they mean. So that can create empathy and attunement, but it can also be overwhelming if there aren't good boundaries or enough recovery time. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I suppose my own work as well, I work with a lot of neurodivergent people as well through training, and I know it's very hard when they first receive a diagnosis and trying to make sense of the world and trying to make sense of everything that they've been through prior to their diagnosis as well. And how can that, the autism or neurodivergence or the heightened sensitivity shape how someone experiences relationship, even presently or going forward, with the emotional overwhelm and healing. So I suppose what I'm getting at is, like, how long does it take them to process it, and to understand how they are in those relationships and the sensitivity that they have?
I think it means that someone who's neurodiverse needs more clarity and more honesty, more emotional safety than maybe the average person does. And healing in relationships isn't about becoming less sensitive, but it's about understanding your wiring and creating relationships that can honor that wiring.
And for people, Jen, who may only now beginning to understand themselves differently, what can self-compassion look like for them in that stage?
Mhm. Can I just clarify to make sure I understand? Is this about more reconnecting with self, or maybe I need you to ask me another way?
Okay, so for a neurodivergent person, what can self-compassion look like for them when they're trying to figure things out and when they're in the process of understanding relationships?
I think it's just taking time to ask yourself, what do I need in this moment? What's happening in me right now, and honoring that, whatever that is. If you're feeling a certain emotion or maybe feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated, just asking, what is it that I need and what am I experiencing? Not even trying to fix it or judge it, but just noticing it can take us a long way, you know?
Yeah. And I noticed as well you use the phrase moving from survival to self-leadership with compassion rather than force, which I think is such a powerful way of describing healing as well. And what does that shift actually look like in everyday life, if you could describe it?
Well, when you think of survival mode, it's more reactive. It's about getting through the moment, managing, coping, pushing forward. But self leadership is different.
Mm.
It's when you start, kind of like we were just talking about, it's when you start responding to yourself with an awareness instead of an urgency. In everyday life, that might look like pausing before saying yes, noticing when your body's overwhelmed, or choosing rest instead of pushing through.
And how does someone begin moving away from that survival-based pattern without becoming harsh with themselves?
It can be about becoming someone who checks in with yourself instead of abandoning yourself. It's not at all about perfection, but it's about presence, and presence with self.
Mm.
Even noticing, how am I feeling towards whatever this thing is inside of me? Let's just say anxiety is rising up and you can feel it in your body. And then you can always ask, okay, what is this anxiety trying to tell me right now? What does it need? Just to approach it with a little more curiosity and compassion rather than criticism or self judgment.
Okay. And with the approaches you use for to support someone with healing, you integrate approaches such as the internal family systems, the IFS, the EMDR, and the somatic work into your practice. For listeners who may not be familiar with those, how would you describe simply what they offer in the healing process?
Well, internal family systems is just an approach to understanding the way our brains are designed, just in general, not whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, but that we all have parts of ourselves. We have parts that protect us, that can show up in addictions or numbing out to social media or Netflix, or manager protective parts that get us through the day. And then we have parts of us that hold our pain, and they call them an IFS. Um, I just lost the word. Exiled parts. It's easier just to think of them as the parts that hold the pain. And sometimes they're hidden and we can't exactly reach them. We just notice the protectors. And a lot of times when we interact with each other, it can be my protector running into your protector. And sometimes that can cause conflict. But when we approach ourselves with what IFS calls the 7 C's of self-leadership within ourself, compassion and curiosity, creativity, calm, connectedness. I know I'm forgetting a couple, but that we have that within ourselves, that we can actually encounter this protector part of ourselves and to say, I see you. I know you're trying to help me. What do you need from me? So you can start to ease up a little and maybe get a new job.
And in your experience, what do people most need to understand about healing that often surprises them?
I think honestly, it's almost as simple as just having a little curiosity with themselves. Those 2 words, the compassion and curiosity, are my absolute favorite. And when we can just give a little bit of that to ourselves, we feel the difference. You can feel it in your body when you're not giving judgment and criticism to whatever you're feeling. And I know what it's like. I lived most of my life before my diagnosis really not liking who I was and not liking myself. And little by little, when I realized that I'm feeling whatever it is that's coming up that doesn't feel good, anger or anxiety or sadness, I can approach it to say, okay, you're there for a reason. You're trying to have a voice or give me a voice. And what can I do to speak for my anger, for example, rather than to speak from it? If that makes sense.
No, it does. And I think for someone listening today who may quietly recognize parts of this conversation in themselves, is there one gentle practice or perspective that could help them begin reconnecting with who they are again?
I think just going back to not trying to fix themselves or judge themselves, but just to notice. Just noticing your breath could be something you do, noticing the tension, the emotions, or even just naming, I feel overwhelmed, or I feel calm. That awareness alone begins to build connection and rebuild connection within yourself. I think most of us don't need more strategies because there's so much out there that tells us how we need to fix ourselves and to get better. But we honestly just need more relationships with ourselves, more relationship with ourselves.
And I think that's a very good point. You know, we could be so overwhelmed with strategies. And I think the best thing we need is a relationship with ourselves, because we are going to have a relationship with ourselves for a very long time.
Yeah,
And if we can't have a relationship with ourselves, I wonder, you know, having a relationship with others could be quite difficult in some places if we don't understand ourselves, our needs and our wants.
for sure. For sure. I say that to clients a lot, that at best you're with me for an hour a week, but you're with yourself 24/7. So
We are indeed. And we probably should be working on that relationship a lot more, because it's probably one of the best projects we'll probably get to work on as ourselves.
yeah, absolutely.
And Jen, if someone is currently in the process of rebuilding themselves quietly, what would you most want them to remember?
Mm, that you're just you're worth giving time to, even just within yourself, to give yourself that space to pause and connect with yourself and give yourself love. As cliche as it may sound, but self-love is probably the most important thing in order, like you said, in order to be able to love others and to be in relationship with others. it really does start with ourselves.
And I know sometimes it seems difficult as well, but people throw out there that you need to make yourself a priority once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me, we always need to make ourselves a priority.
Yes.
And I know that could be hard when we're caring for so many other people as well. But if you don't look after yourself first, it's harder to look after others.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Even if it's just a few minutes, before, when you start the day, before you get out of bed, before you lay your head down at night, just to say something kind to yourself.
And finally, Jen, a question I often ask guests because it connects deeply with what this podcast is about. What does living as your empowered self mean to you now after everything you've been through and the work that you do?
To me, living as my empowered self doesn't mean being strong all the time or having everything figured out. It means being aligned with myself, listening to my body, trusting my experience, and showing up as actually as I am in the world. It means I don't abandon myself to make others comfortable. That's probably one of the biggest things I've learned. That my job is not to make others comfortable, if that means abandoning who I am and what I need. And I think it also means that I can hold both my sensitivity and my strength without needing to change either, but both can be together. So back to what I feel like we've been saying throughout our time is empowerment is really about self-trust and self-acceptance.
And thank you for that, Jen. And it goes back to me as well. It just kind of connects everything back to taking care of yourself and making yourself a priority, and the self-love and the self-trust and the relationship you have with yourself.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So Jen, thank you so much for this conversation today. There is such depth, honesty and compassion in what you do and what you've shared. And I know many listeners will take comfort in hearing parts of your own experience reflected here. And also to everyone listening, thank you for being here with us. If something in today's conversation resonated with you, I invite you to take a quiet moment to reflect on what stayed with you. Sometimes it's just one insight, one sentence, or one feeling that can begin a shift. And also, if you'd like to connect further with Jen or explore Jen's work, you can find all her details in the links in the show notes below. And Jen, if it's okay with you, we might put a link of your book on Amazon in the show notes as well, if you would like to go and have a look at Jen's book as well. And if you're looking for a gentle space to pause, reset at the end of your week, don't forget to tune in to the Sunday Reset Rituals episode on Sunday. It's a short reflective episode designed to help you slow down, reconnect, and step into the week ahead with a little more clarity and intention. And as Jen said as well, and as we've been saying throughout this conversation, the most important relationship you have is with yourself. So I do urge you to take time to sit back, relax, and really reflect on the relationship you have with yourself, and maybe think about how you can improve it going forward for yourself. Until next time, take care of yourself gently and have a very good week.